Annie Caldwell stood just beyond the halo of the spotlight. Her breath held tight like the moment before a storm breaks. The grand auditorium of the Boston MedTech Summit buzzed quietly with anticipation. But all she could feel was the heavy silence that cloaked the room. The host's voice finally broke through, calling the name she never expected to hear: Ethan Cole, Chief Technology Officer of NovaBio Solutions. Ethan strode onto the stage with a confident, polished air, adjusting his cufflinks with the practiced ease of a seasoned politician. Behind him, a towering 25-foot screen flickered to life, showcasing the crown jewel of NovaBio, the revolutionary predictive load integration engine, or PLIE, the very system Annie had architected years ago. Her badge still read, Senior Systems Engineer, but the weight of that title felt hollow tonight. For the last 5 years, she'd been the quiet force behind the code, debugging and refining every line she'd painstakingly written, sometimes from a cramped hospital room where she sat beside her ailing mother. The original schematics, once scribbled on worn paper during late-night shifts, were now displayed like a trophy behind Ethan, erased of any trace of her name or sacrifice. As Ethan delivered his glossy speech, brimming with leadership and vision but void of the sleepless nights, the failures, the relentless grind, Annie's heart sank. She stood motionless, invisible among the applause that thundered around her, as he accepted credit for the innovation she had breathed life into. In that charged silence, Annie felt the weight of betrayal settle deeply, but beneath it simmered a quiet resolve. This wasn't just a story about stolen code or stolen glory. It was the beginning of reclaiming what was hers. And tonight, under the cold glow of the stage lights, that fight quietly took root. Annie Caldwell stepped into the glass-walled office of Ethan Cole, CTO of NovaBio Solutions, her chest tight with a mix of anxiety and quiet determination. The quarterly performance report rested firmly in her hand, a document that didn't lie. The numbers spoke clearly. Record-breaking system uptime, 3 hospital integrations completed ahead of schedule, and flawless deployment of 2 major new modules without a single rollback. For 5 consecutive quarters, her team had outperformed every department at NovaBio. But none of that mattered here. Ethan's eyes barely lifted from the glowing screen of his phone as she entered. "Annie," he said without enthusiasm. "Perfect timing. I was just reading the Slack thread about your latest deployment. Solid work." His tone was polite but hollow, an obligatory nod rather than genuine praise. Annie steadied her voice, carefully measured but resolute. "Thanks, Ethan. I wanted to discuss compensation." That caught his attention. He finally looked up slowly, his gaze sharp and calculating, lips pressing together just enough to betray mild irritation. "A raise? Walk me through your thinking." Annie didn't flinch. She laid it all out. 5 years of relentless dedication, consistently exceeding performance goals, spearheading complex cross-functional launches, mentoring every junior engineer who joined her team, and architecting the very backbone of the system that NovaBio relied on day after day. "This system runs on my code. My work is the foundation." Ethan sat back, steepling his fingers. "Annie, you're exceptional. No one disputes that. But compensation at your level isn't about raw performance alone. It's about strategic impact, big picture thinking, leadership vision. Tactical contributions don't move the needle in the way strategic ones do." Her jaw tightened. The familiar sting of invisibility crept in. Years of technical leadership dismissed as tactical. "So, when does tactical get rewarded?" she asked quietly. Ethan rose and adjusted his jacket, lifting his espresso cup in a slow, deliberate motion. "You keep the engine running, Annie, but not everyone is meant to steer the ship. No roadmap, no plan, just a patronizing smile and the unspoken message that she wasn't part of the visionaries." Back at her desk, Annie's fingers trembled as she opened a long-forgotten folder deep within her encrypted drive. Inside was the final draft of the patent she had filed in 2018, the adaptive load integration engine. The very same design she had poured herself into while sitting in a cramped hospital room, watching over her mother's final hours. That patent was hers, officially, filed under her name, Annie Caldwell, an independent inventor, despite the company's name emblazoned on every product release. Memories flooded back. The cold tiles beneath her as she typed out the application at 2:46 a.m. The heavy silence of that hollow apartment. The relentless grief and numbness. She hadn't just filed a patent, she'd planted a flag in the chaos. Staking claim to something no one could take. But now the quiet humiliation transformed into simmering resolve. The next day, rumors spread like wildfire inside NovaBio. A security breach investigation targeting the unauthorized use and replication of proprietary code. The suspect? A former employee, who had allegedly acted maliciously. Annie's access was instantly revoked. Her email bounced. Slack account deactivated. VPN credentials disabled. It was as if she had vanished from the company's existence overnight. She tried desperately to log in through the admin shell she had used for years, denied. Every familiar tool, every digital doorway slammed shut. Yet just when despair threatened to consume her, an encrypted email arrived, from an anonymous Proton mail address. The message was simple. They forgot to remove backup root access. Use it, do what you need to do. Her breath caught. Tentatively, she entered the credentials. The terminal flickered. Access granted. For the first time in weeks, Annie felt a surge of power, of control. This was no impulsive act of revenge. It was precision, quiet, calculated, surgical. She didn't rush to strike. Instead, she watched and collected evidence, piecing together the digital breadcrumbs of betrayal and theft. Every line of code, every commit message, every timestamp bore her fingerprints. The corporation might have stolen credit, accolades, and revenue, but they hadn't taken her ownership. Not yet. She rebuilt her engine, cleaner, stronger, more secure, on an anonymous private cloud, encrypting every directory, erasing metadata, layering defenses against future attempts to erase her work. Her fire no longer burned for recognition or praise. It was a controlled blaze of purpose. Then came the email that changed everything. From Lena Park, CEO of NeuroQuant, a rising medtech startup specializing in AI diagnostics. The message was brief, professional. Our IP scan flagged a match between your published work and our internal needs. Can we talk? Annie reread the message twice. No accusations, no assumptions, just interest and curiosity. She was no longer just an employee or a ghost in NovaBio's machine. She was the architect of something undeniable. Annie's heart pounded as she stepped into the sleek, glass-walled office of NeuroQuant's CEO, Lena Park. The room was minimalist, white walls. A single whiteboard filled with complex equations and system architecture sketches. And a faint hum of servers in the background. Lena didn't rise to greet her. Instead, she gestured toward the chair across the desk with a calm, steady gaze. Show me, Lena said simply. Without a word, Annie handed over the encrypted drive. Lena plugged it into her laptop and began to navigate through the files with practiced speed. The kind that comes from living in terminal windows and sleeping less than most humans should. Annie sat rigidly, fingers tapping an unconscious rhythm on her thigh, her mind racing through what could happen next. Suspicion? Skepticism? Indifference? None of it prepared her for the quiet intensity with which Lena studied the code. Halfway through the encryption layer, Lena paused and murmured, "This comment style, it's yours." Annie nodded, swallowing hard. She wrote every line. Lena continued, scrolling rapidly through source files and deployment logs. The room felt charged, as if Lena wasn't just reading code but recognizing a fingerprint pressed into fresh concrete. Finally, Lena leaned back. This is the spine of what NovaBio calls proprietary architecture. Their CTO renamed half the modules. Stripped your attribution before launch. Annie's chest tightened. Of course he did. Lena's jaw clenched slightly, but her voice remained steady. You never signed an IP transfer, did you? No, Annie whispered. They never asked. The laptop closed gently, as if protecting something sacred. Lena sat quietly for a moment, then spoke with cold resolve. We will make them pay. Not with noise or vengeance, but with precision, the kind you bring to surgery or war. For the first time in years, Annie didn't feel broken or powerless. She breathed deeply, the weight of betrayal beginning to lift. But the fight was far from over. Back at NovaBio, a storm was brewing behind closed doors. The company's internal communications buzzed with panic, emails, Slack threads, and whispered conversations about the sabotage and the breach. The narrative was being shaped. Annie Caldwell, the disgruntled former employee, was the mastermind behind a malicious replication of company IP. Her name was scrubbed from systems, her credentials revoked, her very existence erased in the eyes of the company she had helped build. But outside the walls of NovaBio, things were shifting. NeuroQuant's legal team filed an urgent inquiry with the company's leadership, presenting irrefutable evidence of patent infringement and unauthorized use of proprietary technology. Attachments included high-resolution scans of Annie's original patent filing, complete with her signature and timestamp, alongside meticulous commit logs and internal chat exports. One transcript, in particular, revealed Ethan Cole, casually discussing how they just changed file names and stripped metadata. Confident that no one reads below the abstraction layer. The arrogance was staggering. Within hours, the story exploded online. Tech blogs, forums, and social media lit up with discussions of the scandal. NovaBio scrambled to erase digital traces. Dev blogs vanished. GitHub contributions were privatized. And even a once popular podcast interview with Ethan disappeared without explanation. But the damage was done. By midweek, two of NovaBio's largest investors, Eden Capital and Arcton Ventures, publicly announced they were pulling funding. Their statements were clinical and measured, re-evaluating our position in light of governance failures and IP disputes. But the message was clear. The oxygen was being cut off. Annie watched the unfolding chaos from NeuroQuant's temporary war room, a converted conference space littered with legal documents, code printouts, and an industrial coffee maker working overtime beside her. Matt, NeuroQuant's VP of Strategic Operations and a former IBM veteran, glanced up from a phone call. "You're everywhere," he said with a knowing smirk. Annie offered a tired smile. "Not by choice." Then came the seismic shift. Fairview Medical Group, one of the nation's top hospital networks, quietly announced its migration to NeuroQuant's diagnostic platform. No press conference, no fanfare, just a subtle banner on their website and a tweet declaring, "We believe in ethical tech. Proud to partner with NeuroQuant for next-gen diagnostics." The message was loud and clear. Moments later, Lena sent Annie a single line, "Check CNBC." On the midday segment, Ethan sat awkwardly in a hastily staged office, flanked by bookshelves that seemed more for show than substance. His voice was tight, rehearsed. "NovaBio has always valued its engineers. We are shocked by these allegations. This is a misunderstanding, not misconduct." Annie's breath caught as memories flooded back. Ethan handing her a slice of cheap cake on her birthday, whispering, "Keep building like this, Annie. One day your name will be on every floor." Now, on national television, he couldn't even say her name. Later, a screenshot arrived from the anonymous contact who had given her root access, an internal NovaBio email thread marked, legal exposure. The message instructed a full purge of any documents, code, or references to the adaptive engine predating 2019. Scrub it all. Slack. Drive. Get it clean. Annie's stomach churned with the bitter realization that Ethan was orchestrating a digital erasure, trying to rewrite history and silence her once and for all. Yet as Matt said, "They're spiraling, pulling docs faster than we can archive them." Annie stared at Ethan's frozen face on the TV screen, the chill crawling up her spine. She should have felt victorious. And part of her did, but beneath the triumph was a deep well of grief. Grief for the version of herself who once believed in loyalty, meritocracy, and fairness, for the naive engineer who trusted the promises of leadership and hard work. That girl was gone. In her place stood someone forged in quiet resilience, armed with truth, silence, and undeniable proof. After the storm of accusations, betrayals, and public drama, Annie Caldwell found herself in an unfamiliar space, one that stretched far beyond office walls and courtroom battles. It was a space of quiet reflection, a shift in perspective forged by hardship and clarity. No longer was she the isolated engineer fighting to reclaim stolen credit, she was becoming a leader in her own right. a beacon for others who had been silenced or erased. The days following the legal uproar were a whirlwind. NovaBio crumbled from within. Investors pulled out, clients fled, and the company's reputation shattered like glass underfoot. But for Annie, the external chaos only sharpened her resolve. She retreated into the war room at NeuroQuant, surrounded by allies who believed in her vision and her integrity. Here, with Lena Park and Matt at her side, she began to see the fight not just as a personal battle, but as a call to change the culture of innovation itself. Annie reflected on how her own view of leadership had transformed. For years, she had measured success by silent toil, long nights debugging lines of code, mentoring colleagues, and shouldering the weight of invisible labor. But leadership wasn't just about the work done behind the scenes. It was about owning one's narrative, demanding recognition, and standing firm against forces that sought to diminish the truth. She thought back to Ethan's words during that painful meeting. You keep the engine running. But not everyone's meant to steer the ship. At the time, those words stung like poison, a cold dismissal of her value. Now, they served as fuel. Annie realized that the ship wasn't just NovaBio's, it was the entire tech industry's tendency to elevate visionaries while sidelining the architects, the builders, the tactical experts who actually made things work. Her battle had become a symbol of resistance against that systemic injustice. In quiet moments, Annie revisited the beginnings of her journey, the nights spent in that hospital room beside her mother, typing out the early drafts of the adaptive load engine patent. The grief, the exhaustion, the determination to leave something lasting beyond personal loss. That raw vulnerability was now her strength. She began to reach out, connecting with other women and underrepresented engineers in the medtech field. Through private chats and virtual meetups, she shared her story, not as a tale of defeat, but as one of empowerment. Many reached back, revealing their own struggles with recognition, bias, and erasure. Together, they formed an informal network, a community of creators who refused to be invisible. Annie saw how her story inspired others to speak up, to claim their ideas, and to challenge outdated hierarchies. Meanwhile, NeuroQuant's momentum grew. Lena's promise of precise, measured justice unfolded through legal channels. But more importantly, through a renewed focus on ethical innovation. Annie's role shifted from being just the whistleblower to becoming a trusted advisor and advocate for transparent IP practices. She helped draft new policies that emphasized creator ownership and equitable credit. This shift rippled beyond just legal victories. It sent a message that innovation was not a top-down edict but a collective effort where every contribution mattered. Annie also grappled with her own evolving identity. No longer was she defined solely by the code she wrote or the patents she filed. She was becoming a voice, strong, clear, and unwavering, speaking at conferences, mentoring rising engineers, and pushing for systemic change. She realized that leadership wasn't about climbing ladders, it was about widening paths for others to follow. One evening, as she prepared for an upcoming panel discussion at TechMed Global Summit, Annie sat quietly in her apartment, reflecting on the journey. The city lights flickered beyond her window, a reminder of the countless lives touched by the technology she helped create. She thought about the silence before the applause, the tense, suspended moment when recognition is just out of reach. That silence had once felt like a weight, a punishment for her efforts. But now, it felt different. It was a space for gathering strength, for centering herself before stepping into the light. Annie knew that the fight was far from over. There would be more challenges, more attempts to silence or sideline her and others like her. But she also knew something else. Truth has a way of breaking through, and the power of a reclaimed story was unstoppable. With renewed clarity, she drafted her keynote speech, one that didn't dwell on bitterness or revenge, but on hope, resilience, and the collective power of creators who refuse to be erased. Her voice was steady, her purpose clear. This was not just her story. It was theirs, all the builders, the quiet leaders, the unsung heroes. It was a call to reclaim space, to demand justice, and to build a future where every innovation is honored, and every creator recognized. After months of quiet preparation and relentless effort, Annie Caldwell's world began to shift in ways she had only dared to imagine. The storm that had threatened to consume her was transforming into a powerful current, carrying her toward new horizons. The legal battles against NovaBio were ongoing. But Annie's focus had expanded beyond vindication. She was ready to seize the opportunity to build something new, something that reflected her values, her vision, and the integrity that had been tested and proven. NeuroQuant had become more than just an ally in the fight. It was a beacon of innovation grounded in ethics and respect for creators. Lena Park, the company's CEO, was a visionary leader who understood that true progress required not only cutting-edge technology but also a culture of trust and collaboration. When Lena invited Annie to join NeuroQuant's leadership team as Chief Innovation Officer, it wasn't just a job offer, it was a declaration of faith in Annie's talents and her ability to shape the future of medtech. The transition was both exhilarating and daunting. Annie left behind the shadow of her former employer, stepping into a role that demanded not only technical expertise but also strategic thinking and public leadership. She embraced the challenge with determination, eager to apply the lessons she had learned from betrayal and loss to create a more inclusive and transparent environment. One of Annie's first initiatives at NeuroQuant was to spearhead the development of a next-generation adaptive load integration engine, built from the ground up with modular architecture, enhanced security protocols, and scalability designed for multi-institutional deployment. This new engine was not just a technical upgrade, it was a statement. It embodied the principles of openness, respect for intellectual property, and collaborative innovation. Working alongside a diverse team of engineers, data scientists, and clinicians, Annie fostered a culture where every voice was heard and every contribution valued. She prioritized mentorship and empowerment, ensuring that junior engineers, especially women and underrepresented minorities, had the support and resources to thrive. The momentum was palpable. NeuroQuant's platform quickly gained traction in the medtech community, attracting partnerships with major hospital networks and research institutions eager to align with a company that championed ethical innovation. Annie's leadership was recognized not only within the company but across the industry. Invitations to speak at conferences, participate in panels, and contribute to policy discussions became frequent. Yet, Annie remained grounded. She remembered the isolation and erasure she had faced and was committed to using her platform to amplify the voices of others. Through public talks and mentorship programs, she advocated for systemic change, calling for transparent intellectual property practices, equitable recognition, and inclusive leadership. Her efforts culminated in a landmark collaboration with a coalition of medtech startups and academic institutions to establish an open-source IP registry, a secure digital platform where creators could register their innovations, track usage, and assert ownership rights. This initiative aimed to reduce disputes like the one Annie had endured and foster a culture of trust and accountability. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings against NovaBio continued to unfold. The evidence Annie and NeuroQuant presented was irrefutable, forcing the company to confront its misdeeds. Public opinion had firmly shifted in Annie's favor, and the industry watched closely as the case set new precedents for protecting creators' rights in the tech world. Through it all, Annie found moments of quiet satisfaction. The battle for recognition had become a journey of transformation, not only for her but for the broader community of innovators. She understood now that setbacks were not endpoints but catalysts for growth and change. One evening, as she prepared to address a global summit on healthcare innovation, Annie reflected on how far she had come. From the hospital room where she filed that first patent amidst personal tragedy, to the courtroom and boardroom battles, to this moment on the cusp of leading a movement, her story was one of resilience, courage, and unwavering commitment. Her keynote speech would not only recount her journey but also challenge the industry to rethink how it values and protects its creators. It was a call to action, a demand that the future of innovation be built on a foundation of fairness, respect, and collaboration. Annie knew the road ahead would still have obstacles, but with new opportunities opening and allies by her side, she was ready to lead with clarity and strength. The silence that once weighed heavy before the applause had transformed into a powerful stillness, a moment of focus before a new era of innovation dawned. In the months following her appointment as Chief Innovation Officer at NeuroQuant, Annie Caldwell experienced a profound transformation, not just professionally, but deeply personally. The battles that had once left her feeling fractured and invisible now served as the foundation for her growth into a leader with newfound confidence and clarity. Her days were filled with the demands of innovation leadership, strategizing product roadmaps, managing diverse teams, engaging with stakeholders, and navigating the complex intersections of technology, ethics, and business. But beyond the daily grind, Annie was quietly reshaping how she saw herself. Gone was the doubt that had shadowed her during her years at NovaBio, the sense that her contributions were secondary or tactical, never quite strategic enough. Instead, she embraced a broader vision of leadership that honored both technical mastery and the courage to claim her rightful place. Annie had learned that leadership was not merely about authority or titles, but about influence, how she inspired others, how she cultivated trust, and how she championed inclusivity. She became deliberate in her mentorship, fostering an environment where junior engineers felt empowered to speak up, take risks, and grow. Many reached out to her with stories of feeling sidelined or unheard in their own careers, and Annie met each with empathy and guidance. One of the most significant shifts for Annie was learning to balance vulnerability with strength. She openly shared her journey, the moments of pain, betrayal, and loss alongside the triumphs. This transparency forged deeper connections within her team and community. It showed others that setbacks were not failures but vital parts of growth. Annie also became a vocal advocate for mental health and work-life balance within the high-pressure tech environment. She instituted flexible work policies, encouraged regular breaks, and hosted sessions on resilience and mindfulness, recognizing the toll her own relentless drive had taken during the darkest times. She was determined to create a culture where well-being was integral, not optional. The technical challenges were immense. Rebuilding the adaptive load integration engine with enhanced security, scalability, and modularity required long hours and complex problem-solving. Yet Annie found renewed joy in the craft itself, the thrill of crafting elegant code, the satisfaction of overcoming bugs, and the collaboration that sparked innovation. At conferences and industry panels, Annie's presence grew more commanding. She spoke with the authority of experience but tempered by humility. Her story resonated widely, not as a tale of revenge but as an inspiring example of resilience and ethical leadership. Invitations poured in from organizations eager to learn from her insights on intellectual property rights, diversity in tech, and building sustainable innovation ecosystems. Still, Annie remained grounded in the quiet moments, early mornings reviewing code, late nights drafting policy proposals, solitary walks reflecting on the journey. These were the spaces where she reconnected with her purpose and prepared for the next challenges. An unexpected but welcome part of Annie's growth was reconciling with the past. She reconnected with former colleagues and mentees from NovaBio, many of whom had quietly supported her during the upheaval. These bridges allowed healing and fostered collaborations that transcended old wounds. Annie also confronted the emotional scars left by betrayal. Through therapy and support groups, she processed grief and anger, transforming them into resilience and compassion. She learned to forgive, not to excuse the wrongs done but to free herself from their hold. This inner work enriched Annie's leadership, allowing her to approach conflicts with empathy and strategic patience. It also strengthened her resolve to prevent others from experiencing similar injustices. One evening, as Annie prepared for a keynote at a global innovation summit, she reflected on how far she had come. The woman who once sat alone in a hospital room, balancing grief and a flickering hope, had evolved into a leader shaping the future of healthcare technology. Her journey was far from over, but she carried forward the lessons of perseverance, integrity, and courage. Annie's story had become a beacon, not only of technical brilliance but of human strength. The night before the TechMed Global Summit keynote, Annie Caldwell sat alone in her hotel room, the city lights twinkling far below. The small black USB drive rested in her palm, a symbol of every hard-fought battle and every quiet victory along the way. She wasn't nervous, not in the way she once was. Instead, There was a calm resolve, a steady fire burning quietly beneath the surface. The next day, the auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Investors, engineers, journalists, and industry leaders filled the room, many of whom had followed the saga between Annie and her former employer. Some faces were familiar, others skeptical, but all waited to hear what she had to say. Annie stepped onto the stage with steady footsteps. The spotlight hit her, but she didn't flinch. She carried the weight of years, loss, and perseverance, but also the light of reclaimed truth and hope. She began not with bitterness or accusation, but with memory. 5 years ago, Annie said, voice clear and unwavering, I submitted a provisional patent for the adaptive load integration engine from a hospital room. I was not a CEO, not a manager. I was simply someone trying to protect what I had built, what I had poured my heart and soul into. A hush settled over the audience. The company I worked for took that invention and rebranded it as their own. They erased my name, denied my contributions, tried to silence me, but the truth remained, quietly waiting to be reclaimed. Annie lifted the USB drive. This is the founder's proof. Not because I own a company, but because I finally reclaimed my name. Applause rippled through the room, growing steadily until the entire hall was standing. Annie felt a surge of gratitude and strength. For the first time in years, she stood not as a shadow behind someone else's glory, but as a creator, a leader, and a voice. She spoke then about resilience, the power of persistence in the face of erasure, the importance of owning one's narrative, and the responsibility to uplift others who walk similar paths. Annie shared stories of the network she helped build, a community of innovators who refused to be invisible. She called on the industry to foster cultures of transparency, respect, and ethical collaboration. This isn't just my story, she said, it's the story of every engineer, every creator, every person who has been silenced or sidelined. It's about reclaiming our place and building futures where truth and integrity thrive. After her speech, Annie was approached by countless attendees, young engineers inspired to speak up, veterans moved by her honesty, leaders eager to join her movement. The summit was more than a platform, it was a catalyst for change. Weeks later, at the Innovation Gala, Annie found herself face to face with Ethan Cole. He stood beneath a grand chandelier, still wearing his confident posture but with a subtle weariness in his eyes. Maya, he said, her old nickname from their earliest days, you win. Annie tilted her head. Unreadable. This wasn't a game. His facade faltered. I made a mistake. I should have taken you seriously. She took a slow sip of her drink. You didn't make a mistake. You made a decision. Before he could reply, a young engineer nearby spoke loudly enough for those around to hear. Isn't that the guy who stole your algorithm and laughed when you asked for a raise? Heads turned. Ethan's face froze. Without another word, he left. Annie didn't follow. She had somewhere else to be. Moments later, she walked onto a different stage, the one where she once stood in the shadows. Now, the spotlight was hers. This isn't a story about revenge, Annie began. It's about reclamation, about taking back what they tried to erase. She held up the USB drive once more. This is proof, but you don't need a drive like this to matter. You just need to keep building. Keep remembering who you are, especially when they pretend to forget. The crowd rose again in applause. But this time it was different. It was recognition. It was respect. It was a celebration of truth prevailing. Annie's journey had come full circle. From grief and silence to strength and voice. She had reclaimed not only her invention but her identity. And in doing so, she had lit a path for countless others to follow. Annie Caldwell's journey teaches us that betrayal and injustice don't always announce themselves with noise and chaos. Sometimes, they creep in quietly, through silences, omissions, and subtle erasures. Yet, the true power lies not in the absence of conflict, but in the way we respond. Persistence, clarity, and the courage to claim our truth can transform even the deepest wounds into sources of strength. Her story reminds us that ownership of ideas, achievements, and identity is not just a legal matter but a deeply personal one. It's a declaration of self-worth and a refusal to be invisible. When others try to rewrite our stories or diminish our contributions, The path forward is to gather evidence, build alliances, and stand firmly in our integrity. Annie's story is a powerful testament to reclaiming not just what was taken, but also one's voice and dignity. It encourages all of us to build boldly, protect fiercely, and remember who we truly are, especially when others try to make us forget. Thank you for choosing to listen to this story among thousands of stories out there. Like and subscribe to continue listening to the latest stories.